One rainy night, a simple act of kindness changes a mechanic's life forever. When a billionaire returns, nothing will ever be the same. Rain poured from the dark gray sky like a curtain, drenching everything in sight. The small town streets were slick and shiny under the headlights of passing cars. Inside a little garage on the corner of Maple Street, Jake wiped the grease from his hands and sighed. It had been a long day in gents, oil changes, and the smell of gasoline clinging to his clothes. He was about to close up when thunder rolled across the sky, followed by a flash of lightning that made the windows rattle. Jake pulled his jacket tighter around him and stepped outside to lock the gate. That's when he saw a sleek black car pulled over on the other side of the road, hazard lights blinking in the rain. It wasn't just any car. Even from a distance, Jake could tell it was expensive, something most people in town would never even dream of owning. He hesitated for a moment, glancing at the rain that was already soaking his boots. But when he saw someone step out of the car, struggling with an umbrella that flipped backward in the wind, his instinct took over. Without thinking twice, he jogged across the street, splashing through puddles. As he got closer, he saw a woman in a long beige coat trying to pop open the car hood. The rain ran down her hair and face, but she looked more frustrated than cold. "Hey there. Need a hand?" Jake shouted over the sound of the storm. The woman turned, startled. Her makeup was slightly smudged from the rain, but she was clearly someone used to being in control. "Oh, thank goodness. My car just stopped working and I have no idea why. I called roadside assistance, but they said it'll be at least an hour." Jake smiled kindly. "You're lucky I was closing up just down the road. Mind if I take a look?" She stepped aside, relief flooding her face. "Please, be my guest." Jake bent over the engine, lightning flickering above them as he checked connections and wires. The car was spotless inside and out, clearly well kept. But after a minute of tinkering, he spotted the issue: a loose battery cable. He tightened it quickly, his fingers numb from the cold rain. "Try starting it now," said, stepping back. The woman slipped into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine roared to life instantly. She gasped and looked up at him through the open window, a smile spreading across her face. "You've fixed it. I can't believe it was that simple." Jake laughed. "Most of the time, it is. People panic before checking the small things." She got out again, still smiling. "You have no idea how grateful I am. I had an important meeting an hour away and I thought I was stuck here all night." "No problem at all," Jake said, waving it off. "Glad to help. You should be fine now. Just make sure that cable's tightened properly next time." The woman reached into her purse, pulling out a shiny black wallet. "Please, let me pay you. You came out in the rain and saved me. It's the least I can do." Jake shook his head, taking a step back. "No need for that, ma'am. I didn't do it for money." She blinked, surprised. "Most people would have accepted without hesitation." "Are you sure? You probably just saved my night." He shrugged with a small smile. "Just doing what I'd hoped someone would do for me." For a second, she studied him like she couldn't quite believe it. Then she laughed softly. "Well, that's rare these days." Jake smiled, embarrassed by her attention. The rain began to lighten, turning to a misty drizzle. The woman looked down at her drenched coat and laughed again. "I don't even know your name," Jakey said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Jake Miller." "I'm Madeline," she replied, extending her hand. Even wet and cold, she carried herself like someone important. Madeline Hart. Jake shook her hand gently, unaware that her name was known by millions, one of the richest women in the country, owner of several global companies. To him, she was just another person in need. "Well, Madeline, you'd better get going before the roads flood again," Jake said. She smiled, stepping toward her car. "I will. Thank you again, Jake. You really are something special." He watched her drive away, the taillights fading into the mist until only the soft sound of rain remained. For a moment, he stood there, wondering who she really was. Her clothes, her car, the way she spoke it, all hinted at a life far removed from his own. But Jake didn't think much about it. He just turned back toward his little garage, shaking his head with a grin. Inside, the warmth of the workshop greeted him. He hung his jacket and checked the clock. Almost midnight. As he locked up, he couldn't shake the image of Madeline's grateful smile. Maybe it was the way she said his name. Or maybe it was because, for once, he'd helped someone who wasn't just another face from town. Outside, the storm slowly died down. The air smelled fresh, and the town was quiet again. Jake got into his old pickup truck and headed home. He didn't know that the woman he'd just helped was thinking about him too, that inside her luxury car. Madeline kept replaying the encounter in her mind. She had met countless people in her life, investors, politicians, celebrities. Yet this one humble mechanic had treated her with more kindness than most of them ever had. By the time she reached her mansion on the outskirts of the city, she was still smiling. Her assistant met her at the door, shocked to see her soaked from head to toe. "Miss Hart, what happened?" The assistant gasped. "Just a little adventure in the rain," Madeline said with a laugh. "But I met someone interesting tonight." Meanwhile, Jake's small apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater. He made himself a simple dinner, still thinking about the strange evening. He wondered where that woman was headed and what kind of meeting was so important. He didn't even know her last name. But in his heart, he felt good, like he'd done something that mattered. Before bed, he looked out the window at the wet streets, shining under the streetlights. It was one of those nights that felt ordinary, yet somehow different. Jake had no idea that this simple act of kindness would soon turn his entire life upside down. In a few days, his quiet little world would be visited by something extraordinary. A sound he'd never expected to hear near his old garage. The roar of helicopter blades cutting through the morning air. But for now, he slept peacefully, unaware that fate had already started working behind the scenes. Linking his name forever with the billionaire woman he'd once helped in the rain. The next morning came with bright sunlight and clear skies. The storm was gone, and everything looked fresh and clean. Jake arrived at his small garage early, like always. The scent of oil and metal filled the air as he opened the rolling door and switched on the lights. It was another ordinary day for him, customers coming in with old cars, engines needing repair, and bills waiting to be paid. He grabbed his cup of coffee and sat on a stool near the workbench, thinking about the woman he had helped the night before. Madeline, the name echoed in his mind. She had been polite, grateful, and different from most people who drove expensive cars through town. He remembered how calm and kind her voice was, even in the middle of a storm. For some reason, he couldn't stop replaying that moment in his head, the way she smiled when her car started again. Jake shook his head and laughed at himself. "She's probably already forgotten about me," he muttered. To her, he was just a mechanic who happened to be in the right place at the right time. He picked up his wrench and went back to work, focusing on the next job that came in, a rusty old pickup with a broken axle. The day passed quickly. People came and went, cars were fixed, and by evening, Jake was covered in grease again. When he finally locked up, the thought of Madeline drifted through his mind once more. But he brushed it away and headed home. The same quiet life waiting for him there. While Jake lived his simple routine, Madeline's world was entirely different. She sat in her glass office high above the city, her desk filled with reports, phone calls, and meetings that never seemed to end. Her company had just launched a new project worth millions, and her team looked to her for decisions every minute. Yet, for the first time in years, she found herself distracted. Every time she tried to focus, her thoughts wandered back to that rainy night. She remembered the way Jake had refused her money. Most people she met wanted something from her: contracts, deals, attention, or favors. But Jake had wanted nothing. He helped her without hesitation and walked away with nothing but a smile. That, more than anything, stuck in her mind. During a meeting, her assistant noticed her tapping her pen and staring out the window. "Madam, are you all right?" he asked softly. Madeline blinked and smiled faintly. "I'm fine, just thinking." She didn't tell him what she was thinking about. How could she? It sounded strange even to herself. Why was she thinking about a mechanic she barely knew? But something about Jake's honesty had touched her. Later that night, when she returned home, she looked at her car parked in the driveway. The same one he had fixed. She walked around it slowly, her hand brushing over the smooth metal. It reminded her of that rainy road, the sound of thunder, and the kindness in Jake's eyes. She smiled without realizing it. The next morning, Madeline had breakfast on her terrace overlooking the city. Her personal chef served her coffee and toast, but her mind was already elsewhere. She wondered what Jake's life was like. Did he own that garage? Did he have people working with him? Did he fix cars all day without ever thinking about what lay beyond that little town? As the days went by, she couldn't stop herself from checking the map to find where that small town was. It was only a short helicopter flight away from her estate. The thought made her curious, almost excited. She didn't know why, but she wanted to see him again to thank him properly. Maybe even to learn more about the man who didn't treat her like a billionaire. But just like a person stranded in the rain, back in the small town, life went on as usual for Jake. He didn't have much, but he had peace. He worked hard, paid his bills, and sometimes helped people who couldn't afford repairs. Everyone in town knew him as the guy who never turned anyone away. He wasn't rich, but he was respected. One afternoon, his friend and coworker Tom noticed him staring off into space while changing a tire. "Hey Jake," Tom said, grinning. "You thinking about that fancy car from the other night?" Jake chuckled. "Maybe. It's not every day you see a car like that around here. Or someone like her," Tom teased. "You sure you don't regret turning down that money?" Jake shook his head. "Nah. Some things are worth more than cash." "You're a strange man, Jake," maybe Jake said with a smile. "But I sleep well at night." The two men got back to work, the sound of tools clinking filling the garage. The radio played old country songs, and the smell of motor oil hung in the air. Jake was content, unaware that far away someone was planning to pay him a visit. Meanwhile, Madeline made a decision. One evening, she called her assistant. "I need you to schedule a flight to Mapletown this week," she said. Her assistant looked surprised. "Mapletown? That's a small place. What's there?" Madeline smiled faintly. "Just someone I'd like to see." She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. For days, she arranged her schedule so she could take a break from her usual rush of meetings and business events. It felt strange to care about something so simple, but she felt lighter just thinking about it. The next few days were quiet for Jake. He didn't notice the whispers among the townspeople about a strange helicopter scene flying low nearby. He didn't think it had anything to do with him. His hands were full fixing an old red Mustang that a customer wanted restored. He worked late into the night, humming to himself. The warm light of the garage spilling out into the dark street. He had no idea that his life was about to take an unexpected turn. Far above, in the city skyline, Madeline watched the forecast. Clear weather for the weekend, perfect for flying. Her eyes sparkled with a hint of excitement she hadn't felt in years. She looked at her reflection in the window and smiled. "Let's see how the good mechanic is doing," she whispered to herself. Jake, on the other hand, ended his long day by wiping his hands on a rag and locking the garage. He leaned against his old truck, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. Life felt peaceful, predictable, safe. He didn't know that peace wouldn't last much longer in just a few days. The same woman he helped in the pouring rain would appear again, this time not in a car by the roadside, but descending from the sky in her private helicopter, right into the heart of his small-town world. And when that moment came, everything Jake thought he knew about his life, his future, and himself would begin to change in ways he never imagined. It was a quiet Thursday morning when Jake arrived early at his garage. The air smelled of fresh coffee and engine oil. Birds were singing outside, and the hum of the highway was faint in the distance. It seemed like just another ordinary day. He rolled up the garage door, switched on the lights, and started checking the cars waiting for repair. There was an old Jeep that needed a new transmission, small sedan waiting for tire replacement, and a few walk-in appointments lined up. Everything was normal until the sound hit him. It started faintly, a low rumble from above growing louder by the second. Jake frowned and looked up through the open garage door. The noise wasn't like anything he usually heard in the small town. It wasn't thunder, and it wasn't a truck. Then the wind picked up, dust flying everywhere. The sound turned into a loud worry, almost deafening. Jake's tools rattled on the workbench. Tom, his friend and coworker, ran out from the back room. "What on earth is that?" he shouted over the noise. Jake stepped outside. shielding his eyes from the blowing dust. His jaw dropped when he saw a sleek silver helicopter slowly descending right over the parking lot. The machine hovered for a moment before settling down gracefully on the cracked pavement in front of the garage. The blades spun wildly, kicking up wind and small stones. A small crowd of neighbors began to gather near the fence, pointing and whispering. It wasn't every day a helicopter landed in their little town, let alone at Jake's modest garage. "Are we getting arrested or something?" Tom joked nervously, his eyes wide. Jake didn't answer. His heart pounded as he watched the helicopter door open. Out stepped a tall woman wearing sunglasses, her hair tied neatly despite the wind. She looked elegant but familiar. Jake squinted against the sunlight and then froze. It was her, Madeline. She was dressed casually in jeans and a fitted jacket. But even then, she carried the same confident grace she had that night in the rain. Her smile was calm, knowing, almost amused as she spotted Jake standing there. Speechless, Jake wiped his hands on his work rag, trying to look presentable. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. Madeline walked toward him, her heels clicking against the pavement. "Hello, Jake," she said warmly, pulling off her sunglasses. "I hope I'm not interrupting your morning." Jake blinked, trying to find words. Well, you could say that," he said awkwardly, glancing back at the helicopter. "That's quite an entrance," she laughed softly. "I suppose it is. I didn't think you'd mind a little surprise visit." Tom stood behind Jake, his mouth hanging open. "You know her?" he whispered. Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, I helped her out during the storm last week." Tom whistled under his breath. "You didn't tell me she was?" Rich. Jake ignored him and turned back to Madeline. "What brings you here? Car trouble again?" Madeline smiled. "Not this time. I came to see you." Her words made the entire garage go silent. Even the curious neighbors quieted down as the helicopter's blades slowed. Jake blinked in disbelief. "To see me? Why?" She looked around at the garage, her eyes scanning the old tools, the worn-out benches, and the half-fixed cars. "I couldn't stop thinking about the night we met," she said honestly. "You helped me when you didn't have to. You didn't ask for anything, and you refused my money. People don't do that anymore. I wanted to thank you properly." Jake scratched the back of his neck, clearly embarrassed. "You already thanked me. It was no big deal, really. It was to me," she said softly. She walked around the garage, genuinely curious. "This is where you work?" Jake nodded. "Yep. Been running it for about 7 years now. Not much, but it keeps me busy." Madeline smiled as she looked at the walls covered in tools and old posters. "It's honest work. I like that." Tom, unable to hold back his curiosity, stepped forward and whispered, "Miss, you came here in a helicopter just to thank him?" Madeline chuckled. "That, and maybe to ask a few questions." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Questions?" "Yes," she said. "You mentioned you work on all kinds of cars. Do you ever restore old ones? Classic models, maybe?" Jake's eyes brightened a little. "Actually, that's my favorite kind of work. I don't get many, but yeah, I've rebuilt a few old beauties over the years." Her expression turned thoughtful. "I have a small collection of vintage cars. Some of them need special attention. Most mechanics I've met just look at them like trophies, not machines. I thought you might see them differently." Jake chuckled, trying to hide his surprise. "I might, but I'm guessing your definition of small collection isn't the same as mine." Madeline smiled. "Maybe not, but I'd like you to take a look at them. Would you be interested?" For a moment, Jake didn't answer. He looked around at his little garage, at the old concrete floor, the noise of tools in the background, and then back at the elegant woman standing in front of him. It felt unreal. A week ago, she was just a stranger, stuck in the rain. Now, she was offering him a chance most mechanics could only dream of.
"Oh, ma'am."
"I don't think I'm exactly the kind of guy who works for billionaires," he said honestly. Madeline's eyes softened. "That's exactly why I came to you. You're different. You work with your heart, not for money." Jake felt his throat tighten slightly. He didn't know what to say. Tom elbowed him. "Dude, say yes," he whispered. Jake laughed awkwardly. "Well, I guess I can take a look. Doesn't hurt to see what kind of cars you've got." Madeline's face lit up. "Wonderful. I'll have my assistant send you the details. Maybe next week you can visit my estate and see the collection." Before Jake could respond, her phone buzzed. She looked at it quickly, then smiled apologetically. "I have to get back. But thank you for letting me drop by unannounced."
Oh.
Jake nodded, still half stunned. "Yeah, sure. Anytime, I guess." As she turned to walk back toward the helicopter, the townspeople stepped back, staring in awe. She waved at them kindly before climbing aboard. The blades started spinning again, blowing dust everywhere. Jake watched as the helicopter lifted off the ground and disappeared into the blue sky. He stood there for a long moment, completely speechless. Tom finally broke the silence. "So, a billionaire just flew here to see you, offered you a job, and left? You realize how crazy that sounds, right?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, still looking at the sky. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I realize it." That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning. What did this all mean? Was she serious about the offer? Would he really be working on cars worth more than his entire garage? But more than that, he couldn't stop thinking about her smile when she said, "You're different." He didn't know where this new path would lead. But something inside him knew one thing for sure: his quiet. Ordinary life had just been interrupted by something extraordinary. And deep down, he couldn't deny that part of him was excited to see where it would go next. A week later, Jake found himself driving down a long, winding road that led out of town. His old pickup looked completely out of place among the tall iron gates and manicured lawns that stretched for miles. He had cleaned up as best as he could, fresh shirt, neat jeans, and his hair combed, but he still felt nervous. He wasn't used to visiting mansions or meeting billionaires. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he approached a massive gate with a gold sign that read Hart Estate. He rolled down the window as a guard approached. "Name?" the guard asked politely. Jake Miller," he said. "Miss Madeline invited me." The guard nodded, checked a clipboard, then pressed a button. The huge gate swung open slowly. Jake drove in, his eyes wide at the sight before him. The driveway was lined with tall oak trees and fountains. The mansion at the end looked like something out of a movie. Large glass windows, stone walls, and perfectly cut hedges surrounding it. Jake parked near the side garage, where Madeline's assistant was waiting. The man smiled and said, "Mr. Miller, Miss Hart is expecting you. This way, please." Jake followed him through a corridor that led to a wide garage unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was spotless, with polished floors that reflected the light. And there they were, rows of vintage cars, each one shining like new. Jake's mouth fell open. There was a 1965 Mustang, a red Ferrari from the 80s, and even an old Rolls-Royce. Madeline was already there, dressed casually but elegant, as always. She turned when she heard his footsteps. "Jake, you made it," she said warmly. "Yeah," he replied, still staring at the cars. "I think I just walked into a dream." Madeline laughed softly. "I told you I had a few classics." "A few?" Jake said, amazed. "This looks like a museum."
Oh.
She smiled. "Maybe. But these cars aren't meant to sit still. They're meant to run, to breathe again. That's why I wanted you here. I want someone who actually cares about bringing them back to life." Jake walked around, studying the cars carefully. "They're beautiful," he said. "But some of these need serious work. See this one?" He pointed to a blue Jaguar. "Engine looks clean, but I bet the wiring's outdated, and that Ferrari's paint might be cracking under the polish." Madeline looked impressed. "You see all that just by looking?" He smiled modestly. "When you spend half your life fixing engines, you start to notice things." For the next few hours, they went car by car. Jake explained what each one needed, how long it would take, and what parts would be hardest to find. Madeline listened closely, asking questions and taking notes. She wasn't just pretending to care, she was genuinely interested. As they worked, the atmosphere became easy, almost friendly. Jake forgot about who she was for a while. He talked about his passion for cars, how he'd learned from his father, and how fixing engines was like solving puzzles. Madeline listened with admiration. "It's rare to meet someone who loves what they do this much," she said. He smiled shyly. "It's all I know, really. I've never been rich, but I've been happy doing what I love." Madeline looked thoughtful. "Money doesn't always bring happiness. I've built companies, bought everything I ever wanted, but sometimes it feels empty." Jake looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her voice. "Empty? You have everything." She shook her head. "Things aren't everything. I miss the days when success actually felt exciting. Now it's just pressure, meetings, and people who smile because they want something." Jake didn't know what to say. For a moment, he saw not a billionaire, but a lonely woman who just wanted to feel normal again. They took a break, sitting by the side of the garage. Madeline's chef brought them coffee and sandwiches. Jake tried not to spill anything on his shirt, so Madeline said with a teasing smile, "What do you think about working here for a while? You'd have full access to the cars, the tools, and the parts. I'll pay you whatever you think is fair." Jake hesitated. The offer was incredible, but it also scared him. "I don't know, Miss Hart. I've got my own garage back in town. My customers depend on me." She nodded. "I understand. But maybe you could manage both. Spend a few days a week here, work on the restorations, and still run your garage. I'll even have my driver pick you up when needed." He thought about it for a long moment. It was tempting: new tools, rare cars, a chance to work on things most mechanics only dream about. "You really trust me with all this?" he finally asked. Madeline smiled softly. "I trust my instincts, and my instincts say you're the right person." Jake looked at her, then at the cars again. "All right," he said finally. "I'll give it a shot." Madeline clapped her hands together, delighted. "Wonderful. I'll have my assistant draw up the details." "I knew you'd say yes." The rest of the afternoon passed quickly. Jake started examining the first car in detail, making notes on what to order. Madeline stayed nearby, asking him about tools, parts, and his ideas for the restorations. It didn't feel like a boss and worker situation. It felt like teamwork at one point. She laughed when he accidentally left a grease mark on his face. "You look like you've been in a fight with an engine," she said playfully. Jake chuckled. "That's pretty accurate." By the time evening came, the sky turned orange with sunset. Jake packed up his notes and wiped his hands. "Well, I should head back before it gets dark," he said. Madeline nodded. "Of course. Thank you for coming, Jake. I'm really glad we met again." "Me too," he said honestly. As he walked back to his truck, he turned for one last look. Madeline was still standing there, watching him go. Her helicopter sat silently nearby, waiting for her. She looked peaceful, like she hadn't been in years. On the drive home, Jake couldn't stop smiling. He felt proud and curious. What started as a rainy night favor had turned into something much more. It wasn't just about money or cars anymore. It was about connection to very different people finding common ground through something simple and real. That night, as Jake sat in his small apartment, he opened his notebook and began sketching ideas for the cars. He was excited for the first time in a long while. Far away in her mansion, Madeline sat by her window watching the stars. She felt lighter, almost happy. She had met countless business partners and clients, but none had made her feel this calm, this real. Both of them, without saying it, knew something had changed. It wasn't love yet. It was something quieter and deeper, a friendship built on respect and honesty. But neither of them knew that this connection was just the beginning of something that would soon change both of their lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and Jake's visits to Madeline's estate became part of his routine. Every Tuesday and Friday, a black car would arrive at his garage to pick him up. He'd spend the day working on the classic cars in her private collection. Each time he arrived, he was greeted by the same calm air of elegance, the same perfectly kept gardens, and always Madeline's warm smile waiting near the garage at first. Jake felt out of place, surrounded by luxury he could never imagine owning. But soon, he started to feel comfortable. The cars became his world inside that mansion. He worked with focus and care, often losing track of time as he brought old engines back to life. Madeline would sometimes join him, watching curiously, asking questions about every nut and bolt. She seemed fascinated by his patience, his attention to detail, and how he treated each car like it had a story to tell. One afternoon, Jake was bent under the hood of a 1970 Aston Martin when Madeline walked in, carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. "You've been working for hours," she said with a smile. "You need a break before you pass out." Jake wiped his hands and laughed. "I guess I got carried away. This beauty's engine hasn't purred like this in decades." She handed him the glass. "You sound like an artist talking about his painting," he smiled. "In a way, it is art. You restore something broken, give it a second life." "It's kind of beautiful, actually." Madeline nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I like about you, Jake. You see value where others see old metal." They sat on a bench outside the garage, sipping their lemonade while the warm afternoon sun fell over the estate. It felt peaceful, natural. There was no billionaire and mechanic at that moment, just 2 people sharing quiet company. "You ever think about expanding?" Madeline asked suddenly. "Your garage, I mean?" "You have talent, Jake. You could open a bigger one. Maybe even your own classic restoration shop." Jake chuckled. "I've thought about it. Sure. But dreams like that take money. And investors. And I'm not exactly the type people line up to invest in." Madeline smiled knowingly. "Maybe you just haven't met the right investor yet." He looked at her curiously. "You mean you?" She tilted her head playfully. "Perhaps." Jake shook his head, half amused and half serious. "I don't want charity, Madeline. I like earning what I get." Her eyes softened. "It wouldn't be charity. It would be partnership. You'd handle the cars, the craft, the name. I'd just give you the resources to make it real." Jake didn't answer right away. The offer was tempting, almost too good to be true. But it scared him too. Working for her was one thing. Building a business with her felt like stepping into a whole new world. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "Fair enough," she said, smiling. Over the next few days, Jake's thoughts were restless. Every time he fixed a car, he imagined what his own restoration shop could look like, a place where classic cars came back to life under his care. He thought about how his father would have been proud to see it. But another thought kept him cautious. He didn't want Madeline to think he was using her for money. He respected her too much for that. One evening, as he packed up his tools, Madeline came into the garage again. "You've done amazing work," she said, walking around the newly restored red Ferrari. "It looks perfect," Jake grinned. "She runs smoother than silk now." Madeline looked at him with admiration. "You know, I've had top engineers work on my cars before, but none of them cared as much as you do. You have something rare, Jake." He laughed lightly. "What's that?" "Heart," she said simply. The way she said it made something warm stir inside him. For a long moment, they just looked at each other in silence. Then Madeline smiled, breaking the tension. "Come with me. I want to show you something." She led him out of the garage and across the garden. The evening air was cool and the sky glowed orange with sunset. They stopped in front of a smaller building Jake hadn't noticed before. Madeline opened the door and the lights flicked on. Inside was an empty workshop, bright and freshly painted. New equipment lined the walls. In the center stood a large sign that read Miller Classic Restorations. Jake froze, staring at it in shock. "What? What is this?" Madeline smiled proudly. "Your new workshop. Consider it my way of saying thank you." "You deserve this, Jake." He turned to her, speechless. "Madeline, I can't accept this. This is too much." She shook her head. "No, it's not. You earned it. You showed me what real passion looks like. You reminded me why I fell in love with hard work in the first place. This is for you." Jake took a deep breath, emotions tightening in his chest. He didn't know what to say. All he could manage was, "I don't know how to thank you." She smiled softly. "Just keep doing what you do best. That's thanks enough." For a moment, silence filled the room, but it wasn't awkward. It was full of unspoken understanding and respect. Then Madeline added quietly, "You helped me that night in the rain when you didn't have to. You changed how I see people. I wanted to return that favor in some way." Jake looked at her with genuine gratitude. You didn't have to change my life for that. She laughed gently. Maybe I wanted to. Weeks passed, and the new workshop officially opened. People from town came to see it, amazed by its size and quality. Jake hired a few of his old friends, giving them jobs and training them on classic restorations. Word spread quickly, and soon people from other towns started bringing their cars to Miller Classic Restorations. Madeline visited often, sometimes bringing clients, sometimes just stopping by to see how things were going. Every visit brought laughter, warmth, and quiet friendship. She and Jake had become close, understanding each other in ways few others could. One day, as they stood outside the new workshop, watching the sunset, Madeline turned to him and said, "You know, Jake, you taught me something." He smiled. "What's that?" "That kindness doesn't need a reason. You helped me that night just because it was the right thing to do. I'd forgotten how simple goodness could be." Jake looked at her, his eyes soft. "And you reminded me that sometimes good things come back around when you least expect them."
Oh.
They stood there for a while, neither saying anything more. The sky turned from gold to deep purple, and the sound of crickets filled the air. For Jake, life had changed in ways he could never have imagined. A simple act of kindness on a rainy night had led to a friendship, a new dream, and a future brighter than he ever thought possible. And for Madeline, that same night had reminded her of something money could never be: genuine connection and trust. As her helicopter flew away from the workshop one last time that evening, Jake stood outside, watching it disappear into the distance. He smiled to himself, feeling proud and thankful. Sometimes he thought, life has a funny way of rewarding good hearts. All it takes is one small act, one moment of kindness in the rain, to change everything forever.